Blessed to be a part of your day. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Out to Lars Larson of The Lars Larson Show, larslarson.com. You can catch him on Twitter, social media. Lars, good morning.
Kevin Miller, how are you?
Living the dream, of course. Lars will be on tonight, 6 o'clock right here on KIDO Talk Radio. So the president putting some tariffs on the Mexican government. Your reaction, sir?
I think it's sensible, and I'll tell you why I think it's sensible. I think that by doing this, we pressure the Mexicans to take control of their own border. They're capable of doing it. The Mexican government is famous for tough enforcement of its own immigration laws, right? And yet, what that means is I've had any number of people remind me that you cannot get away with, say, going to Mexico on let's say you went on an extended vacation, 30 days. And you're down there and you think, hey, somebody just offered me some work. I think I'll pick up a little extra cash while I'm here to offset the cost of my vacation. I mean, if you're down there for a while. The Mexican government will come down and you like a ton of bricks, you'll end up in jail. And why do they do that? Because they say they really guard who comes into their country and who does not. So when people are coming in on their southern border and then crossing 2,000 miles in identifiable groups and then crossing our border, that has to be with the acquiescence of the Mexican government. And I think they're doing it for, well, political and negotiating purposes. You let something awful happen to your trade partner, and then your trade partner, I guess, could acquiesce to things. Instead, Trump is saying to Mexico, you knock it off, or you're going to pay the penalty. And you will pay the penalty. Mexico makes about $500 billion a year on exports. A lot of them are to the United States. How else do we get them to negotiate? They clearly know that the president does not want this massive influx of illegals coming across our border. And last week, we hit a brand new record with 1,000 people being taken into custody in a single day. The previous record was in the 440 range. So we have huge numbers of people flooding into our country. They're creating a crisis. It's the kind of thing that if the Boise police suddenly faced some antagonistic population in Boise that said, I can do anything I want, and you had massive numbers of people breaking the law, knowing that at the point where the Boise jail becomes full, what are the police going to do? They can't lock you up. They can write you a ticket, and you can tear the ticket up and ignore it because the laws don't mean anything to you if you didn't have voluntary compliance with the law. That's what Mexico is doing, and what effectively the people from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador are doing is saying, if we come in big enough numbers, I know the better metaphor. Have you heard about flash mobs hitting retail stores?
Yes.
Okay, where you have 50 generally younger people all flood into a store at once, all pick up several items, and all go running out of the door. Who's going to get caught? Effectively, no one. So can you get away with it? Yeah. It's theft, but if you do it on a massive enough scale, the store and its security guards and the police can't do much about it meaningfully.
Well, it's like that old football thing. They're flooding the zone. Now, Lars, You as a patriot, you as someone who loves America, yearly you go to the Fair Conference. You've been there. We've had the pleasure of being with you there for several years.
I hope you're going to be there this year, Kevin. It's very important.
I'm working on that right now with the powers that be here at the Broadcast Center, and look forward to having you on the program and seeing you in person. But, Lars, you talk to these folks. You talk to the people that have been impacted by this in the real world, the angel moms and others, and yet the media doesn't cover these issues.
No, they don't, because their point of view is a liberal point of view. And I say liberal from the standpoint that they have a liberal interpretation of what you're allowed to do. So you say, we don't think those people should have to obey the law. I would love to interview some of the reporters who view this as acceptable that our country has a wide open border, because it's dangerous. None of those news organizations has a wide open door. I know because on times I've gone to the NBC bureau in Washington, D.C., which is right down the street from where you just mentioned it, at the hotel, the Phoenix Park Hotel, where we stay and we do the broadcasts on Capitol Hill. You can walk down the street about a block and a half, and there's a giant building that houses C-SPAN, Fox News, NBC News. A lot of the news organizations are clustered there, which is what gives them that view out the window with the Capitol that you can see on the Sunday morning shows. And when you walk into that building, first of all, they have a security guard standing right in the lobby if you cause trouble. You walk up, you show picture ID, they issue you a name badge that you stick to your shirt that has your photo printed on it because they take a photo right there. And then in some cases, you're allowed to go on upstairs wherever you're going. In other cases, you will be escorted by a security guard. Now, that's the security on an ordinary television news bureau. They don't let anybody in who doesn't have business there and isn't coming in legitimately. And then their reporters turn around and say, well, why are we stopping all these people? Why don't we just let them flood into our country? Well, why don't you just let people flood into your news organization so that anybody who wants to come in and say, I disagree with Fox or I disagree with NBC, why don't you let them just come on in and tell you what's on their mind? The answer is because having those kinds of borders and controlling who comes into your place is your right. You have a right to decide who comes into your house. You have a right to decide who comes into your place of business, any of those places. So I'd love to ask those reporters, so why is it that you look at it this way, that somehow our country can be wide open, but your news organization is not wide open?
Our great friend Lars Larson joining us on KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Catch him tonight at 6, anytime, larslarson.com. Lars, what do you make of the California Democratic Party's convention, people booing former Governor Hickenlooper, Nancy Pelosi getting booed? Truly, does that represent, you believe, the mainstream voice of the Democratic Party?
Well, I think they've got a problem because their party, as much as the Republican Party has been bifurcated a bit by the election of Donald Trump, although I think people fairly quickly realized the candidates who stood by President Trump in the 2016 election did well. The never-Trumpers, for the most part, lost their elections. And then in 2018, there were a few people who were antithetical to the president. They didn't do as well as the candidates who were pro-Donald Trump. So that sorted itself out pretty quickly. Now you have a Democrat Party that's divided between the socialist left-wing end of the party that has emerged with people like Bernie Sanders in 2016, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib, the radical Muslim members of Congress that have come out in 2018 and just after 2018. And they can't decide which way they want to go. You've got a party that's bifurcated because part of the party, I wouldn't say half, maybe it's greater than half, wants to impeach the president. That's the party. Do I think the voters have a taste for that? And the answer is I've seen the public opinion polls. Americans do not want to impeach this president. They may think he's rude and crude and occasionally intemperate in what he says and what he does, but they don't want to impeach him. And they understand the cost that impeachment will have. So does Nancy Pelosi. So does Chuck Schumer. They understand that if you decide to impeach this president, it's probably going to cost you at the polls. And by that, I mean they could literally lose their majority in the House of Representatives in the 2020 election. So what happens when they virtually assure Donald Trump's reelection, which the polls are saying right now he's odds-on favorite to win in 2020? And those were 3 polls cited by thehill.com, just in case anybody's wondering. I try to be careful of the polls that I know are a bit politically biased. And they said that the best polls that did the best predictions in 2008 and 2012, everybody was off in 2016, except you and I, who knew that Donald Trump was going to win. The ones that have had the best predictive ability are showing Donald Trump as the winner. So they end up with 4 more years of Trump, and they lose their majority in the House. And Republicans, and not just Republicans, conservatives like you and me, for whom the Republican Party is too soft, we'll look at Donald Trump in his second and last term in office and say, you now have majorities in both chambers, put the screws down and make these people pass the kinds of changes that America wants. He'll also be guaranteed at that point, I think virtually guaranteed, a third pick for the Supreme Court, which will literally change the court for the rest of your life, Kevin, and my life. You're younger than me, but it will change the court well into late middle age for my granddaughter, who's now 3, which is a great thing for America. But the legislative changes we could get in those last 4 years would be tremendous. And Nancy Pelosi realizes that. So what do you do when you're in a party when part of your party wants to basically pour gas on themselves metaphorically and set themselves on fire as a party. And you say, well, you can't do that. And they say, yes, we can, because we're holding to our beliefs. Great. Your beliefs are going to be the undoing of your political party and probably the removal of most of your party's power.
Our great friend Lars Larson joining us. Lars, we always have that moniker, the hardest working man in broadcasting. But
yeah.
I mean, you do a regional show.
Thank you.
You do a national show. Two-part question. Which do you enjoy the most? And could you describe for us life in Oregon and Washington and how it's different from life here in Idaho?
Well, look, Idaho is blessedly conservative, more so, though. Although I've cited your example and you by name, Kevin, in mentioning that you're seeing people move in from the outside to escape the liberal policies of places like California, but then they bring some of those practices that ruined the place they were in before to the place they're moving to, which makes no sense whatsoever. But as far as which show I like best, honestly, it is the Northwest show. And why? Because I get to talk not at a 30,000-foot level about national policies or policies in other parts of the country, but what's right up in front of the people's faces, people in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho who listen to the Northwest show, so that I can talk about the individual policies and how they affect people. For example, last week I got a Facebook message, and I don't bring everybody on who messages me by Facebook, but this gentleman wrote to me, and he said, listen, I'm a Democrat, but he said they just passed a new law last year in Oregon, and he said, I'm trying to deal with a rental house I have, and I'm basically being told I can't sell it legally. And I thought, well, this is interesting, so I corresponded with him by email, and I set him up for an interview. This guy's no dummy. He's a primary care doctor. So when he worked in Southern Oregon, he bought a house. And when he moved up here a few years ago to Portland, he decided to rent the house because it wasn't the best time to sell it. So he's renting it. He has a management company that picks up the rent and takes care of whatever issues come up, plumbing and locks and things like that, all the things that come up with the rental housing. He decides, I think I'll put it on the market and I'll sell it, cash it out, and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. So his management company, the rental management company that's taking care of the house for him, says, well, number one, you can't sell it. And he says, why not? And they said, to sell it under the new law, you must get a firm written offer on the table from a buyer. He says, okay, fine. And they said, then you can give the tenants 90 days notice after you get that. So you put it on the market, and maybe you get an offer in a month. And then you tell your tenants, okay, in 3 months you have to move out. How many people would simply walk away from a deal like that when they're told, yes, you can buy the house, but you won't be able to take possession for close to 4 months? That's going to be having bought a number of houses, that's going to be a deal killer for many people. Further, if you want to take possession now or within the next 90 days, you end up being the person who has to evict those tenants. And if you have any problems with them, and sometimes departing tenants create problems, they fight being pushed out, and even though they have no right to, I always assumed when I rented a place to live, and I rented many places to live in Spokane, in Eugene, in Portland, that when I was done renting it, or if the landlord gave me notice, they'd give me a reasonable notice. And these days, I think 90 days is more than reasonable. I think 60 days is generous, and I think 30 days is sufficient for most people. If you were told by X date you need to be out, then, say July 15th, you need to be out. Okay, I go out and I start looking. Nobody wants to have to relocate. But then again, tenants can relocate. They can tell the landlord, oh, by the way, I'm not renting from you after the end of my lease. And the landlord has to find a new tenant. The reverse is true. If the landlord says, I'm going to have you move out, but I'm giving you plenty of notice, so you have time to go find a new place and make your move. These days, he was told by the management company, the third piece of bad news was, if you even put it on the market, we don't want to be in the middle of that eviction process. So the minute you put it on the market, we are no longer your rental agent, and most of our competitors who do the same kind of work are not going to take you on either. So here he is, a primary care doctor living 100 miles away from a house he rented because he had to move, and he's being told you have to manage the rental. That means when you want to go rent it, you have to arrange for people to come see it, and you'll have to drive to Eugene, 2 hours, show it, then drive home, and maybe do that a few times because nobody else will represent you. And all of this, he says, I will never rent another house in my life in this state. Those kinds of policies, which the people at the legislature do because they think we're being good to tenants. Well, in some ways, you're being too good. And I say that having been a tenant before. If I knew I could hang up the landlord, I don't think it would be my style to do that. If he said, I need you to move out in a couple of months, I'd say, okay, give me a date, and I'll go find another place, and I'll move somewhere else. It's never convenient to do that. On the other hand, the relationship has to work both ways, Kevin. You work for KIDO. KIDO employs you. That is a mutual arrangement. If you give one party or the other party greater powers, then you upset that relationship, and it's a private relationship. Now, I think it would be unreasonable to walk in and say, I need you out in a week. Of course that'd be unreasonable. But that's usually the reason someone gives first and last plus a security deposit. You've already paid your last month's rent, so they can't tell you to move out any sooner than 30 days because you've already pre-rented it for the last 30 days you live there. So in most cases, notice used to be given with at least 30 days. That is more than enough time to go and find another place to live. As I said, admitting that it's never convenient to move, even if you're doing it for your own reasons. So you imagine policies like that I ended up talking about on the air. I had this doctor on, and I'd known his mom. His mom has now passed away, but his mom was in politics,
right.
And so Dr. Brewster said, "Look, I'm a Democrat," and toward the end of the interview, he had admitted this to me, and I didn't ask him for it. He just volunteered it. I said, "So you have always voted as a Democrat. You're aware these policies are coming from Democrats who promote them." He said, "Yeah, I am aware of that." And he says, "It's making me rethink how I vote." Because people realize that when the Democrats start to push these liberal policies that are not good for anyone. Now, what happens, Kevin, when a lot of other people who might be inclined to rent their house to anyone say, I don't want to get in the if you get stuck in the middle of one of those situations, you can't sell the house. You don't control the house anymore. If you say, I won't rent it then, I'll sell it. And I'll only sell it to somebody who wants to buy. Well, there are people who have to rent both for financial reasons. And somebody says, I'm moving to Boise for 9 months to do a job. They're not going to buy a house for 9 months. And so what do you do when you start to push more of the housing out of the rental pool? That hurts tenants. It hurts all tenants. So if you do things like that you think are going to be good for tenants, and they end up being bad for tenants, and they sour the relationship between landlords and tenants, which does not have to be a bad relationship. There are an awful lot of people I know who are landlords who say they have a spectacular relationship with their tenants. And there are tenants I know who say, my landlord's great. He treats me this way. Well, that's when you allow them to have the kind of relationship that's voluntary. The minute the government gets in and says, you will have this, imagine the station manager coming to you and say, hey, Kevin, you're going to be best friends with this guy over here who works at the station. You go, I barely know that guy, and I don't particularly like him. Well, you're now best friends. We're going to force it on you. And you say, well, what if I don't want to be best friends? Nope, you're going to get together for beers and poker at least every 2 weeks. And you don't have the choice. The choice is taken away from you. Imagine having your boss tell you that. This is the government telling landlords and tenants, this is the kind of relationship you will have. And if you say it's not an equitable relationship,
right.
One party can give notice and move out. The other party isn't allowed to give notice and have you move out.
Well, that's the advantages, I suppose, of living in Idaho as opposed to Oregon. Outstanding job as always, my friend. We can't wait to hear your program tonight at 6.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, Kevin. Take care, and we'll see you at Feet to the Fire.
Yes, sir. Our great friend Lars Larson. Catch him tonight at 6, right after Sean Hannity, only on KIDO Talk Radio.
So it's not about one gun death, Chris, because if it was, we would have done this long ago. We would have done something after the Sandy Hook shooting. We would have done something after the hundreds of gun deaths we've seen under President Trump and over the last decade. But Congress has no guts. They got no spine because they're bought and paid for.
There we have it from the Fox Town Hall meeting. Kristen Gillibrand, talking about weapons, talking about firearms, and talking about safety. in the aftermath of what happened in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Do we need more laws, more regulations? That's one thing that we've been discussing. Coming up next, the president goes after the Mexican government economically. I'll explain in a minute. First, traffic and weather together. KIDO Talk Radio time is 8:29. Good morning, Dave. And coming up, are you excited about chip sealing season? It's starting in one major Treasure Valley city. Can't we do better? Let's find out together next. First, let's find out what's happening in your world. Good morning, Maggie. Blessed to be with you. Coming up, chip sealing. Is this the best that we can do? You just heard from Maggie. Chip sealing starting in Nampa. And how many people actually go 20 miles per hour during the chip sealing speed limit, during the chip sealing season, if you will? As we said, we're talking about cars that can drive themselves, algorithms that can predict your economic behavior, perhaps even predict presidential elections, sporting events, that sort of thing. And chip sealing is still how we handle the roads and bridges. Well, not really the bridges, the roads here in the state of Idaho. Can't we do better than that? Coming up, a live report from London, England, where the president is going to be there for 3 days and already, well, kind of stirring it up. But first, over the weekend, the president kind of caused the markets to go in a roller coaster sort of way when he announced tariffs on the Mexican government. Let's take a listen.
But before I begin, I'm pleased to announce that we've just reached an agreement with Canada and Mexico, and we'll be selling our product into those countries without the imposition of tariffs or major tariffs. Big difference. As you know, Canada has been for years, and we have a great relationship with Canada and the Prime Minister. We have a great relationship, but they've been charging us extremely high tariffs, as much as 285% or more for our agricultural products, which is an absolute barrier. It's essentially a barrier. In other words, when you pay 285, guess what? You know what they're saying? We don't want your business. So it was a barrier to our farmers being able to do business with them, to our farmers being able to sell product in there. So that deal is going to be a fantastic deal for our country. And hopefully Congress will approve the USMCA quickly. And then the great farmers and manufacturers and steel plants will make our economy even more successful than it already is, if that's possible, which it is possible.
There we have it, the President of the United States, live to London, where the President is right now. Fox News Radio's Simon Owen with us on KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Simon, good morning.
Hi, Kevin. Morning.
Well, I guess it must be afternoon to you. So the president has arrived. What's it like in London for President Trump's big state visit? We heard in the past it was going to be controversial. Has he lived up to his billing?
Well, the first insult was delivered before Air Force One even landed, was on the approach to a London airport, and the president went on Twitter and called the mayor of London a stone-cold loser, thereby continuing a long-running feud with Sadiq Khan, who, for his part, has had a few things to say about this visit himself, said that it should not be going ahead. There should not be a state visit for President Trump. We should not be rolling out the red carpet, he said. He compared President Trump to a 20th century fascist. So Khan has had some things to say. The president has had some things to say in return. So, yes, not the most diplomatic start to this 3-day visit, but since then seems to have been a little more on the straight and narrow. The president has had lunch with the Queen. He's at Westminster Abbey at the moment, inspecting some sites there. He's got tea with Prince Charles coming up, and a fairly sizable state banquet in his honour at Buckingham Palace this evening.
Boy, what do you make of the mayor of London doing that, seemingly taking the bait from the president? And, many people have, said they didn't want the president there in London for an official state visit. And then you have the mayor spelling it out. It just seems very, pardon my ignorance, Simon, anti-British.
Well, I mean, the way he phrased it actually was to say it is un-British to be rolling out the red carpet for a president like this. I mean, look, as I say, these two have been trading insults for several years now. Unfortunately, there's no time on the schedule, it seems, for the two of them to meet on this trip, because that's a meeting that I would be interested to see, so that they could perhaps thrash this out once and for all, rather than tweeting at each other and giving interviews about the other one rather than speaking. But, I mean, I think Sadiq Khan probably thinks he speaks for many in London, because President Trump is not popular in the UK. I think there's plenty of people who think that it's fine to be doing this visit because it's a state visit, it's an honour handed out to the occupant of a very important office in Britain's most important and closest ally. But the president isn't popular, and particularly here in London, which is a very liberal city, voting-wise. So I think Sadiq Khan probably feels he's on quite stable ground here, saying that this visit shouldn't be going ahead. He's far from the only opposition figure who is saying that. You know, the leader of the opposition party is boycotting the state banquet tonight and said that protests that are planned here tomorrow are an opportunity to stand with everybody who President Trump has attacked over the years. So, look, Sadiq Khan is far from the only person who's speaking out in protest against this. What the government, though, says, and what President Trump's supporters say, is that this is bigger than whoever the occupant of the office is. This is the leader of an important ally, and he should be welcome. So, look, you know what politics is like these days. It won't be a surprise for me to tell you that there is a division over this.
You know, Theresa May stepping down. The president has given his thoughts on who should succeed her. How has that been received over there?
Well, I mean, look, it's been received as a breach of diplomatic protocol to an extent. Generally, you don't get involved in another country's domestic politics. But equally, I think nobody's surprised. This is a president who, if he has a thought on an issue, he's not shy of giving it. And he's come out it's not quite an endorsement, I don't think, but he's come out and given certainly some hearty support to one of the lawmakers vying to be the next leader of the Conservative Party when Theresa May resigns. And thereby become the Prime Minister, and that is Boris Johnson. And President Trump has spoken warmly about Johnson and another candidate as well, actually. It's not just been a ringing endorsement for Johnson. But yes, there's certainly been some comments there, and that will undoubtedly ring in the ears of Conservative Party members, who are the ones who choose who their next leader is going to be. So if you hear the name Boris Johnson a bit more in a few months and he's the British Prime Minister, well, it sounds like he's the one who President Trump likes the sound of.
Simon, I'm sure you're going to have some action-packed days. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Our great friend Simon Owen, Fox News Radio, live from London, from the Treasure Valley to London. And when you hear Fox News Radio, you're listening to KIDO Talk Radio in the Treasure Valley, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Let me break this down, what we were talking about earlier. President Trump, his officials will gather around the table today to begin talks aimed at heading off his threat to slap tariffs on Mexican imports. Remember, President Trump last week, it spooked the markets, says he'll impose a 5% tariff on all goods from Mexico unless they stop the Central American migrants from traveling to seeking asylum here in America. Today, Mexico's economic minister is scheduled to talk with Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary. Now, it comes down to this. I think this is a good move. It could get up to 25%. However, farmers are very upset about this. 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Back to the phones. Pro-Life, good morning. You're on KIDO Talk Radio.
Yeah, I was just thinking that chip sealing was wasn't too interesting, so I thought I'd talk about gun laws. Now, back there at Virginia Beach, where they...
Now, wait a minute. Now, before you attempt to hijack the program, which you would never do...
I would never do this.
Exactly. How many people are impacted? And look, I'm going to out myself. I'm getting defensive. Yeah. But you take a look at how many people are impacted by chip sealing. How much? I mean, I'm thinking about going into business with Ray Amaya, Jeff the Suit, and possibly you in doing that windshield repair thing. I mean, how many times have you been somewhere and your windshield gets nicked? Because people speed in the chip sealing zones, because people don't appreciate the idea of, putting yourself in somebody else's position. Because, and again, let me apologize to all my friends driving the big trucks. You have the big trucks that don't have their rock secured, and bing, bam, booey, boom, cracked windshield. That's not very fun, is it? No, how can you say that's not exciting?
Well, it's not exciting until it happens. And then you're mad. But anyway.
Well, we're always mad, but don't you think in the era of in self-driving cars, in going back to the moon and back to Mars, we could think of a better way than chip sealing to make sure that our roads stand up to the winter?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to have some way of sealing it rather than chips, and those rocks are what give the hard surface that so the road doesn't wear down. I mean, you'd have to invent something better than rock. How are you going to do that?
So,
you'd have to ask God to invent something better than rock.
Well, we'll leave you to that. Thank you for the call. Let's go to Tea Party Bob, the mayor of New Meadows, Idaho. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Miller. How are you today?
I'm all chippy about chip sealing, and you?
Well, they're only going to be chip sealing 7 blocks in New Meadows, so you probably might want to move here.
There we have it, the ambassador for the North Country. What can we do for you today, sir?
Just a few words on Hillenbrand and her comments on gun rights. I've said it before, and I guess I just have to say it again. Guns don't kill people. People kill people, and good guys are the ones who legally own firearms and know how to use them. You know, the only thing that will stop a shooter is another shooter, because most of the shooters are a bunch of cowards, and when confronted by deadly force by someone, in most cases, they will stop firing at the innocents and either run, commit suicide, or engage the good guy while trying to get away. You know, it's no different than gun-free zones at schools when certain employers don't allow their employees to be armed at work. Studies indicate that over 2 million times a year, the good guys are the ones that stop armed engagement by criminals, and the bad guys are trying to hurt someone. But no one talks about that. Meadows of America states that armed citizens kill at least twice as many criminals as police do every year. Now, Gillibrand can't even get 1% of the Democratic vote in the polls for nomination as president. So why in the heck is anybody even listening to her? You're running for president on a policy of taking our guns, the sure way to lose a race. And on the tariffs, I say it is about time we did something to force our southern trading partners who have been screwing us to the tune of $50 billion plus a year in trade imbalances and force them to fix the border problem. They could easily control the problem, but they don't want to see these tariffs. They don't want to see these tariffs enforced because they don't want to secure their own borders. Now, this is more of a crisis now than it was before, which is a literal invasion by illegals. And I hope these tariffs wake them up because, you know, that's the way to get someone to do something is to kick them in the wallet. We all know that. The Chamber of Commerce are a bunch of constant complainers.
Right.
And are the same group that want globalization. So why are we even listening to them? Trump's doing the right thing. And this is a tool in his toolbox, so let him use it, and let's stop the invasion.
We appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Have a good day.
Thank you. Let's get back to your calls. Greg in Meridian with Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. You know, this chip seal issue, I brought this up with my father-in-law who lives in southern Utah in Hurricane. And what they're doing down there is they're crushing that gravel down to like sand, and it actually does better sealing. And they have no windshield issues anymore.
I think you've solved the problem.
I mean, can't they look around the country?
I totally agree with you, Greg. You know, the idea that, well, it's just how it is. No, we can do better. That's really what it comes down to. Art in Star with Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Hello, Art.
Hi, Ken. How you doing?
I'm living the dream. And you, sir?
Well, I heard about your chip seal situation, and this information that I'm going to pass on to you is old in the sense it's been around for maybe 10 or 12 years. But apparently, 10 or 12 years ago, there was someone who made an invention that is a complete machine in three sections. It looks like 3 trailers that can actually turn corners and stuff like that. And they stick it on a street, and the front end of the machine eats the street, the entire existing asphalt. And then the middle section reprocesses it, cleans the dirt off of it, cleans up all the asphalt material, adds the necessary refeeds, including the binding agents and stuff like that, heats it up, and the third section lays it down and rolls it out. So it literally goes down the street, eats the existing asphalt, completely refurbishes it completely, and then lays down a brand new asphalt road. And there was a patent on it. I believe it was either in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. I don't remember what state this thing happened in, but I know there's a machine that does this. And that would be your answer to eliminate this. I've seen chip sealing on other places, and that's not really the way to fix a road. And that's the reason being is the cracks in the road. Chip sealing doesn't really handle that too well, and putting the tar in there doesn't work.
Well, it's a great business because you have to do it every year, so we're all frustrated. Yeah. We're all angry, and we don't do anything about it because our officials tell us that's the best thing that we can do.
Yeah, it also destroys the road over time because it allows water to get underneath the sublayerment, and that's what destroys the road. It literally disintegrates the road. You ought to see the roads in Arizona where they had done some chip sealing, especially around the Colorado River, and they were so bad it was almost as if you didn't have a road anymore. It looked like a goat trail.
Well, we don't need any goat trails here. Art, thank you for the call. 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Kevin Miller in the morning, taking your calls on chip sealing season in Nampa. Of course, that means ACHD in Ada County will be announcing that very soon. And if you missed it, in California,
this president told 10,000 lies in his first 828 days in office. Now, that's not leadership. In fact, it is a pathological failure of leadership.
And there we have it. No lib that I know has ever lied. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Blessed to be with you. Don't forget Sean Hannity this afternoon beginning at 3, followed by Lars Larson. KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. So, are we looking at reforming the immigration system? Apparently now, newly adopted rules from the State Department, now requiring anyone seeking a visa to live or work in America must submit their social media information and 5 years' worth of email addresses and phone numbers. So what happens if you come here illegally, though? Okay, so if you play by the rules, you've got to turn over your social media accounts and your phone numbers and email addresses and everything else. How does that work? Have you ever spoken to anyone who has come to the country illegally? You just come in and kind of do it. I've worked with people that have been here illegally for quite some time. There's no requirements. And then you have the amnesty folks. You come in, you wave a magic wand. If you come in legally, it's a little bit different. In the past, this kind of rule only applied to anyone seeking a visa who would be coming from a part of the world controlled by terrorist groups. The new policy will now affect over 14.7 million people traveling to this country each year. So your Facebook, your Twitter, all sorts of things that you have to provide. Now, requiring visa applicants to provide social media information, will that help thwart international terrorism? Will it keep America safe? And why do we have two sets of rules where everybody can find out what type of milk that I buy at Albertsons, what type of eggs I buy at Fred Meyer, what type of seltzered water is available at Winco, and yet we have other folks that come in and there are no responsibilities, no requirements, right? To me, if you're going to start talking about immigration reform and really reforming things, why not have a uniform standard for everyone to make it truly egalitarian, to make it truly something based on merit? By the way, I think that it's a great idea, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it at 580-5436, 580-KIDO. If you come to this country, shouldn't you be willing to add something? In other words, a merit-based system, as opposed to just having people come over and over and over. If you go to Australia, if you go to New Zealand, if you want to emigrate to Mexico, you have to provide a skill. You have to have money, and a lot of money, because the state is not going to support you. So why should it be any different from anybody coming to the greatest country in the world? 580-5436, 580-KIDO. KIDO Talk Radio time, 8:57. Traffic and weather together. Let's get you to work safely and on time. Good morning, Dave. And thank you very much, Larry, for the weather forecast. Kevin Miller in the morning reminding you, don't go anywhere. Glenn Beck coming up next. But before that, back to the big issue. As you're driving around in the city of Nampa, if you haven't heard, please be very careful. Chip sealing starts, which means that'll be happening in Ada County before you know it. And we have the wonderful season, which never seems to end here in the Treasure Valley, which many people will say it's a good thing, the orange cone season, right? Where people are out and, paving roads, expanding roads. Of course, we can't keep up with it, so there are going to be delays. And if I had just one wish, I really like the idea of Greg in Meridian. If you missed it, he was saying, hey, why not grind it down into sand? Apparently they do that in Utah, and then we don't have the rocks that break our windshields, as opposed to what's happening now. Of course, that would hit the chip sealing business. That would hit the people that repair your windshields very hard in the pocketbook. And what a blessed community that we have, that this is a big topic. You know, in Los Angeles, they're not talking about the bull that was on the loose, and now at the Canyon County West Ada West Valley Animal Shelter, right? They're not talking about that. They're talking about more serious issues. And that is why we are so blessed to live in this great community that allows us to talk about a bull on the loose or chip sealing problems. Thank you all for listening. Don't go anywhere. Glenn Beck is next. Ray and Maya, great job. God bless everybody. Keep the faith.